The auditorium was buzzing with excitement and chatter, filled with families, friends, and local music lovers waiting for the talent show to begin. The lights above were bright, casting a warm glow on the polished wooden stage where performers would soon appear. Among all the eager faces in the audience, there was a girl standing quietly at the back, clutching her worn notebook with sheet music. She was small, with a soft, almost hesitant presence that made her seem invisible among the confident, loud performers around her. Her hands trembled slightly, not from fear, but from anticipation and nerves that she had carried with her for weeks. She had always loved music, finding solace in the piano at home whenever the world felt too heavy. Her fingers knew the keys intimately, each one a friend that helped her express feelings she could never put into words. Today, however, was different. Today, she had to perform in front of a crowd that didn't know her and might not even take her seriously. The thought made her stomach twist into knots, but deep inside, she felt a quiet determination. She wanted them to see, even just for a moment, the world she carried in her heart through her music. Around her, the other participants were preparing. Some were practicing in hurried whispers, moving through complicated routines with ease. Some laughed and joked loudly, confident that the spotlight would be theirs to shine. A few noticed the small girl in the corner and smirked, whispering to each other. She caught snippets of their voices, the light teasing about how tiny she was or how soft her presence seemed. It stung, but she took a slow, deep breath and reminded herself why she was here. This was not about proving them wrong. It was about sharing what she loved. Her thoughts wandered to the piano she had been dreaming of playing. The stage held a grand instrument, gleaming under the lights. Its polished surface reflected the overhead glow, and to her, it seemed almost magical. It was more than wood and strings. It was a doorway to another world where she could tell stories without a single word. She could almost feel the cool keys beneath her fingertips, waiting for her touch to awaken the melodies she had been practicing tirelessly for months. As she watched other performers take their places, she noticed how the crowd responded. Applause for the confident, loud acts. Cheers for the performers who were already seasoned. She swallowed hard, feeling the weight of her own insecurity, but she also felt a spark of courage flicker inside. She reminded herself that music was her language. If she let it speak, the world would listen no matter what anyone said. The announcer's voice came over the speakers, introducing the next act. The small girl's heart raced in her chest, each beat echoing the rhythm of the songs she had been rehearsing in her room. She stepped forward slowly, each movement deliberate, trying not to let her nervousness show. The audience's attention was divided, some chatting, some watching curiously, but a few eyes were on her. Not because she was special yet, but because something about the quiet, serious way she moved drew subtle attention. She approached the piano and paused, her fingers hovering just above the keys. The grand instrument was larger than she had imagined, intimidating in its presence. A few people in the front row whispered to each other, casting skeptical looks her way. Their smirks made her hesitate for a moment, but she closed her eyes briefly and thought about the music she loved. She remembered the times she had stayed up late, practicing quietly so no one could hear, letting each note flow like a river of her emotions. That memory gave her the courage to sit down and place her hands on the keys. The first touch was soft, almost tentative. The keys felt familiar under her fingers, yet different under the stage lights and the gaze of an audience. She inhaled deeply and let her fingers find their rhythm. A simple melody filled the room, fragile and delicate at first, like a whisper of her inner world. Some people in the audience tilted their heads, unsure what to expect. A few whispered to their neighbors, questioning if the tiny girl could really fill the space with sound. Despite the murmurs and the skeptical glances, she felt a warmth spreading through her as the notes traveled through the air. The piano became an extension of herself, and she let the music flow naturally. With every chord, she grew more confident, her nervousness slowly melting away. She realized that the people whispering or smirking no longer mattered. This was her moment, and she intended to live it fully. Her small hands danced across the keys, each note more confident than the last. The room grew quieter as the audience began to notice the unexpected beauty of her playing. The melody was simple, yet it carried a depth that surprised everyone. Her music spoke of hope, courage, and quiet strength. Even those who had initially doubted her felt a shift, a growing curiosity and awe at the emotion she conveyed with every note. She opened her eyes and glanced at the crowd. Faces that had once been doubtful were now focused on her, drawn into the story her fingers were telling. She didn't rush. She let the music breathe, letting every chord linger and resonate. She remembered what her teacher had always said: music isn't just about speed or complexity. It's about feeling, about telling a story that touches hearts. And now, under the bright lights and watchful eyes, she felt that she was telling her story truly. For the first time that day, she smiled softly to herself. The mockery, the doubts, the whispered jokes, they didn't reach her anymore. In their place, there was only the music and the quiet wonder it could create. She continued playing, letting her emotions guide her fingers across the keys, each note carrying a little piece of her courage. She felt the audience leaning in, their surprise turning into silent admiration, and she realized that this was the power she had always sought, the ability to move hearts without saying a single word. The final notes lingered in the air like a soft echo, leaving the room in a reflective silence. The girl sat still for a moment, her chest rising and falling as she caught her breath. She looked up at the audience and saw expressions she had never expected. Eyes wide, some glistening with tears, others smiling in quiet amazement. It was a moment of triumph, not because she had defeated anyone, but because she had shared her passion and they had felt it. The applause began slowly, hesitant at first, but it grew louder, filling the auditorium with claps and cheers. She stood quietly, letting the music linger in the hearts of the listeners before taking a small bow. Her face glowed with a mix of relief and pride. Today, she had turned doubt into admiration, whispers into attention, and fear into courage. And though she was just one girl on a big stage, she had made a lasting impression, one note at a time. After the applause faded, the girl returned to her seat at the edge of the stage, trying to calm the rapid beating of her heart. She felt a mix of relief and excitement, knowing she had given her best performance. Yet she also knew the show wasn't over. More performers were lined up, and the crowd's attention would soon move elsewhere. She sat quietly, watching the others, taking mental notes of the different styles and personalities that came before her. Some were bold and flamboyant, drawing laughter and cheers with their theatrics. Others were quiet like her, but lacked the emotional depth she had been able to convey through her music. The girl noticed a group of older kids sitting near the front. They had been laughing and whispering when she first approached the piano, but now their expressions were more cautious. A few exchanged glances, clearly impressed but trying not to admit it openly. She felt a strange sense of satisfaction, not from revenge, but from knowing she had turned their skepticism into quiet curiosity. It wasn't about proving them wrong. It was about showing what she could do, and in that sense, she had succeeded. She thought about the first few moments at the piano when her fingers had trembled over the keys. That initial hesitation had felt like a wall she couldn't break through. But once she let herself connect with the music, everything changed. She realized how powerful it felt to allow her emotions to guide her hands. Every note became a small victory over fear and doubt, and every chord told a story she had long kept to herself. That story, finally shared, had created a ripple through the audience. As the next performers took their turns, the girl's mind wandered to her journey so far. Music had always been her companion, her way to escape the pressures of school, the whispers in the hallways, and the feeling of being invisible. At home, she would spend hours at her old upright piano, her fingers learning the language of emotions. There had been nights when she cried softly while playing, letting the sadness flow through her fingers. There were times when she laughed out loud at the joy a simple melody could bring her. And today, all those private moments had found a stage, shared with strangers who could feel the emotions she had kept bottled up for so long. The audience seemed to shift with each performer, some clapping politely, some whispering to each other, some leaving their seats briefly. Yet, the memory of her performance lingered in the room. The older kids who had once mocked her now watched the next acts with a little more respect, perhaps even envy. The girl noticed the change, but she didn't feel the need to gloat or draw attention to herself. Instead, she felt grateful. Music had done something that words never could. It had spoken for her, and it had made people listen. She glanced toward the judges' table, noticing the expressions of surprise and interest. The judges were leaning forward, pens hovering over their sheets, clearly noting her performance. They whispered quietly among themselves, exchanging impressed looks. The girl felt a swell of pride but also humility. She knew this was only the beginning, that there was still much to learn and many more stages to play on. But for now, the acknowledgement from people who were experienced and knowledgeable about music made her heart swell with joy. As she sat quietly, her thoughts were interrupted by a teacher from her school who had come to watch the show. The teacher smiled warmly and nodded at her, a silent gesture of encouragement. That small acknowledgement meant more than words. It was a reminder that she wasn't alone in her love for music, and that someone saw her efforts and talent. The girl felt a sense of belonging, a connection to a world where music and passion mattered more than appearances or laughter. Meanwhile, in the audience, a few younger children watched her with wide eyes. They were the ones who had come to see the show expecting entertainment, and now they were witnessing something different. They saw a small girl, unassuming at first glance, who had managed to capture the room with nothing but a piano and her dedication. Their eyes sparkled with admiration, and some even whispered to their parents about how amazing her performance had been. The girl felt a quiet thrill knowing that her music could inspire even the youngest listeners. She thought about the challenges she had faced before coming to this stage. Times when she had been ignored or underestimated, when people laughed at her quiet nature or her shy demeanor. Each of those moments had felt like a setback, but they had also been lessons. They had taught her patience, resilience, and the importance of believing in herself even when others did not. And now, sitting quietly after her performance, she realized that those challenges had shaped her into a musician who could convey emotion and depth, even in the face of doubt. Her mind drifted to the next act, a confident teenager who approached the stage with a bold smile. The audience clapped, eager to see the performance, and she watched carefully. She noticed the difference between someone playing to impress and someone playing to express. She understood now that true impact came from connection, from sincerity, from allowing the music to reflect what was in the heart rather than just skill or showmanship. As the performance continued, she felt a sense of calm settling over her. The nervous energy that had gripped her earlier was replaced by a quiet satisfaction. She had faced her fears and shared her story, and that alone was an accomplishment. The reactions of the audience, the respectful glances from the judges, and the inspired looks from the younger children were all affirmations that music had a power beyond competition. It could touch lives, shift perspectives, and create moments of genuine human connection. When the applause for the next performer began, she took the opportunity to stretch her fingers and relax her shoulders. Her thoughts lingered on how far she had come, not just today, but in all the practice, the quiet moments at home, the persistence through doubt and mockery. She realized that every note she had ever played had led her to this moment. And even though there were more performances to watch, she felt a sense of completeness, a feeling that she had truly expressed herself in a way that mattered. As the show continued, the girl stayed alert, watching, learning, and reflecting. She noticed subtle details, the way performers handled mistakes, how they engaged with the audience, the confidence that came from experience. She took mental notes, not to copy, but to improve her own future performances. She understood now that talent was only part of the equation. Dedication, authenticity, and emotional connection were what made a performance unforgettable. By the time the intermission arrived, the girl felt a mix of exhaustion and exhilaration. She had given her heart to the piano, faced the audience, and seen the power of her music firsthand. The whispers of mockery had faded completely, replaced by admiration, curiosity, and respect. She knew that the journey ahead would still be filled with challenges, but she also knew that she had a voice, through her music, that could reach others in ways words sometimes could not. As she stepped outside during the break, the cool air was refreshing. She closed her eyes and took a deep breath, letting the breeze wash over her. She thought about the young children in the audience, the judges, and even the skeptical older kids. All of them had witnessed a glimpse of her inner world, and that realization made her smile. She felt a quiet confidence, a certainty that her music could continue to speak, inspire, and transform moments into something memorable. The girl returned to the auditorium just before the second half of the show began. She took her seat quietly, observing the stage and the audience with a calm focus. Her mind was already racing with ideas for her next performance, new pieces to try, and ways to express her emotions more fully. She felt grateful for the experience, knowing that every performance, every audience, and every challenge was shaping her into the musician she aspired to be. As the lights dimmed and the next act was called to the stage, the girl sat quietly, a small smile playing on her lips. She was no longer the nervous, uncertain girl from the beginning of the show. She had faced Mockery, turned it into a moment of wonder, and discovered the strength within herself. And though there were still more performances to witness and more lessons to learn, she felt ready, confident, and inspired for the journey ahead. As the second half of the talent show began, the girl remained in her seat, quietly observing the stage and the audience. The excitement in the room had not faded, and the performers who came next were confident and prepared, ready to showcase their skills. She watched each of them carefully, not with envy, but with curiosity and learning in mind. Every movement, every note, every smile or frown from the crowd offered her lessons on how to connect more deeply with an audience. Her mind drifted back to the piano she had just played. The memory of her fingers gliding across the keys filled her with warmth. She remembered the first hesitant touch, the way she had felt the music flowing through her, and how the audience had slowly shifted from doubt to admiration. That memory was comforting and empowering. She realized that fear and uncertainty could only hold her back if she allowed them to. By trusting herself and the music, she had already created something extraordinary. Around her, the atmosphere shifted as the next performer, a tall and confident teenager, approached the piano. The audience clapped politely, some with curiosity, others with mild skepticism. The girl watched with keen eyes as the teenager's fingers moved over the keys, producing a fast, flashy piece. The crowd reacted immediately, impressed by the technical skill, but she noticed something missing. There was no emotion, no story being told. She felt a quiet sense of reassurance, understanding that her strength lay not in speed or complexity, but in feeling, in honesty, and in connection. The whispers from earlier in the show had all but disappeared, replaced by quiet conversations and thoughtful expressions. Some audience members were still processing her performance. Others were impressed by the contrast between her delicate, emotional playing and the bold, flashy numbers that followed. She felt a quiet smile forming, a subtle recognition that her music had left an impact that lingered beyond the applause. It was not about competition. It was about touching hearts, and she had done that. As the performers continued, the girl reflected on the journey that had brought her here. She thought about the countless hours she had spent at home, practicing in secret, letting the music wash over her in moments of joy and sadness. She remembered the small victories when she had mastered a difficult piece, the frustrations when mistakes kept repeating, and the quiet determination that had kept her coming back to the piano. All those experiences had shaped her into the musician she was becoming. A few audience members glanced in her direction, curious about the small girl who had captured the room's attention earlier. She noticed the subtle nods of recognition and the warm smiles from people she didn't even know. It was a reminder that her music had created a connection, even in a large and noisy environment. She felt a sense of belonging and purpose, understanding that her gift was meant to be shared, no matter the size of the stage or the audience. During a brief pause between acts, the girl leaned back and closed her eyes for a moment, imagining herself back at home with her old piano. She could see the familiar keys, feel the smooth surface under her fingers, and hear the melodies she had been practicing. The memory reminded her that music was her language, her way of communicating emotions and stories that words could never fully express. She knew that every note she played was a piece of herself, a reflection of her courage, passion, and heart. When it was time for the next act, a younger child approached the piano, nervous and unsure. The girl watched closely, remembering her own nerves from earlier in the show. She noticed the little child's hesitation and felt a quiet empathy. She knew how important it was to trust oneself, to let the music guide rather than force it. She silently rooted for the performer, hoping that the child would find the courage to let their own story come through the keys. As the child played, there were mistakes and moments of uncertainty, but the audience responded with gentle encouragement rather than laughter. The girl smiled softly, understanding that every performer had their own path, and that growth came from practice and persistence. She felt inspired, realizing that her own journey was ongoing and that each performance, each moment on the stage, offered opportunities to learn and improve. The next few performers showcased a variety of styles, from playful and energetic to slow and contemplative. The girl observed attentively, noticing how each person's personality came through in their music. Some relied on technique and speed, while others tried to evoke emotions through dynamics and phrasing. She understood now that a true performance was a balance of skill and expression, and that connecting with the audience required sincerity and presence. As the show progressed, the girl's thoughts returned to the audience's reaction to her earlier performance. Faces that had once been skeptical now reflected admiration, surprise, and quiet respect. Some of the older kids who had whispered and laughed earlier were now watching intently, perhaps reflecting on how easily they had underestimated her. She felt a sense of calm pride, not from proving anyone wrong, but from knowing she had shared a genuine piece of herself. During a short break in the performances, she found herself talking quietly with the teacher who had been observing her. The teacher praised her performance and offered kind encouragement, noting the emotional depth and maturity in her playing. The girl listened carefully, absorbing the feedback and feeling grateful for the support. It was a reminder that guidance and mentorship were valuable, and that even small gestures of encouragement could make a difference in a young musician's journey. When the show resumed, the girl's focus sharpened. She watched each performer with renewed attention, analyzing not just the music, but the way each person engaged with the audience. She noticed subtle gestures, expressions, and body language that enhanced or distracted from the performance. These observations became lessons, helping her understand how to communicate more effectively through her own playing. Her mind wandered to her own growth over the past months. She remembered the early days when she had struggled to play even simple pieces, the times she had felt frustrated and ready to give up, and the moments of triumph when she finally mastered a song. She realized that perseverance, practice, and emotional honesty were more important than speed or perfection. Each experience had built her resilience, patience, and understanding of music as a language of emotion. The girl noticed the impact her earlier performance had on others. Parents whispered to each other about the young girl who had played with such emotion. Children imitated her gestures with their imaginary pianos, and even the judges seemed impressed by the sincerity of her playing. She felt a quiet joy, knowing that her music had left a lasting impression and had inspired others, even if just for a moment. As the last few performers took the stage, the girl reflected on the lessons she had learned from watching them. Confidence, preparation, and authenticity were key, but so was the courage to express oneself honestly, without fear of judgment. She realized that her strength lay not only in her technical ability, but in her ability to convey emotion, to tell a story, and to connect with the audience on a deeper level. The final performer of the evening approached with a mix of excitement and nervousness. The audience leaned forward, eager to see the last act. The girl observed silently, appreciating the courage it took for anyone to step onto the stage. She felt a sense of kinship with the performer, understanding the vulnerability and determination required to share one's passion with strangers. When the final notes of the last performance faded, the audience erupted into applause. The girl clapped along, feeling a sense of satisfaction and completion. The show had been a journey, filled with moments of nervousness, excitement, observation, and learning. She felt grateful for the experience, knowing that she had not only performed, but had also witnessed a variety of styles and expressions that would inspire her future music. As the crowd began to leave, the girl stayed seated for a moment, letting the atmosphere settle. She reflected on the transformation that had occurred within herself and the room. The mockery she had faced earlier had been replaced by admiration, curiosity, and respect. She realized that true impact came from authenticity, courage, and the willingness to share one's passion, no matter the size of the audience or the judgment of others. The girl gathered her belongings slowly, savoring the sense of accomplishment and growth she had experienced. She knew that this was only one performance, one moment in a long journey of learning and expression. But it was a meaningful one, filled with lessons, connections, and the realization that music could transform not just the audience, but also herself. Stepping outside into the cool evening air, she took a deep breath and smiled. The world felt a little brighter, a little more open, and a little more full of possibilities. She had faced her fears, shared her story, and witnessed the power of music to move hearts and inspire minds. And though the night was coming to an end, she knew that her journey was just beginning, filled with future performances, new challenges, and countless opportunities to turn her passion into wonder for others to experience. As the talent show moved into the latter part of the evening, the girl found herself standing near the stage, quietly observing the remaining performers. Each person approached the piano with their own energy and style. Some played confidently, almost theatrically, trying to win applause through speed and complexity. Others were softer and slower, relying on emotion to capture the audience. The girl paid close attention, noticing how each performer's presence, gestures, and connection to the music affected the listeners. She thought about her own earlier performance, how her fingers had trembled at first, and how the music had taken over when she let herself feel it. That had been the turning point, the moment when fear became focus, and doubt became courage. She realized that this was the kind of connection she wanted to create every time she sat at a piano. It was not enough to play notes. She had to convey stories, emotions, and experiences that resonated with those listening. As she watched, she noticed a few audience members exchanging whispers and glances. Some of the older kids who had been mocking her earlier were now sitting quietly, their faces thoughtful. They had been expecting a timid, nervous performance, and had instead witnessed something extraordinary. The girl felt a quiet satisfaction, not from a desire to prove anyone wrong, but from understanding the power of authenticity. Music had a way of speaking where words often failed. A performer stepped forward who looked extremely nervous, gripping the piano bench tightly. The girl felt a pang of empathy, remembering her own fear when she first sat down to play. She recalled the moment when the first note left her fingers, and how the melody had begun to flow naturally after that initial hesitation. She understood that everyone faced their own inner challenges, and that courage was not the absence of fear, but the choice to move forward despite it. As the nervous performer began, mistakes and hesitations were evident, but the girl noticed something remarkable. The audience, having seen the earlier performances, now responded with encouragement rather than laughter. They clapped politely at small successes, smiled at the effort, and seemed genuinely engaged. The girl realized that her own performance might have subtly changed the energy of the room. People were now more open to seeing potential rather than judging appearances. Her attention then shifted to a small group of children in the front row. They had been watching her earlier with wide, amazed eyes. She noticed them quietly imitating her hand movements on imaginary pianos, their faces lighting up with delight. It struck her how her music had inspired even the youngest listeners, and she felt a wave of joy. The impact of her performance had gone beyond applause. It had sparked curiosity and imagination, which was just as important as recognition from adults. The next performer approached with confidence, moving with a flair that drew immediate attention. The audience clapped and cheered, impressed by the bold display of technique. The girl watched carefully, analyzing how the performer's energy and engagement affected the room. She realized that both style and substance were important, but the real magic came when the performer connected their emotions with the music. Without that connection, technical skill alone could only carry the audience so far. As the confident performer continued, the girl reflected on her own growth. She remembered the countless hours she had spent alone at home, practicing quietly, making mistakes, and learning from them. She had often felt invisible, overlooked, or underestimated, but those experiences had strengthened her. They had taught her patience, persistence, and the importance of expressing her inner world through the piano. Each note she played carried not only skill but also emotion and dedication. She glanced toward the judges' table, noticing the subtle nods and smiles as they took notes. The judges had been impressed by her earlier performance, and she could see that they were now observing each subsequent performer with a more critical eye. The girl understood that her own presence had raised expectations, not through arrogance, but by showing that sincerity and emotional depth mattered. It was a lesson she would carry forward in every future performance. During a short break, the girl stepped outside for a breath of fresh air. The cool evening breeze was refreshing, and she allowed herself a moment to reflect. She thought about the journey that had brought her here, the practice sessions, the quiet nights at home, the moments of doubt, and the small victories. Each experience had shaped her into the musician she had become, someone capable of touching hearts and inspiring others through music. Returning to the auditorium, the girl felt a renewed sense of focus. She watched as the next performer approached with a mix of nerves and determination. She noticed how the audience responded, how the energy in the room shifted with each note. Some performers relied heavily on technical skill, while others leaned on emotional expression. She understood that the most memorable performances were those that balanced both, capturing attention while creating a genuine connection. Her thoughts drifted to the earlier mockery she had faced. The laughter and whispers from some audience members had been painful at first, but they had also fueled her determination. She realized that those moments of doubt were not obstacles, but opportunities to prove to herself that her passion and dedication mattered more than anyone's judgment. By embracing her music fully, she had turned mockery into admiration, doubt into wonder. The remaining performers continued, each with their own style and approach. The girl observed quietly, learning from both their strengths and weaknesses. She noticed how body language, facial expressions, and timing contributed to the overall impact of a performance. She understood that music was not just about notes on a page, but about telling a story, evoking feelings, and creating a shared experience with the audience. As the show neared its end, the girl felt a sense of calm satisfaction. She had faced her fears, performed with authenticity, and witnessed a variety of approaches to music. She felt proud of herself, not for receiving applause, but for embracing her passion and sharing it with others. The experience had reinforced her belief in the power of music to connect people, inspire emotions, and leave a lasting impression. Finally, as the last performer finished, the audience erupted into applause. The girl clapped along, feeling a sense of completion and gratitude. She had not only performed but had also observed and learned, gaining insights that would guide her in future performances. The energy in the room was uplifting, filled with appreciation for the courage and talent displayed by each performer. After the applause settled, the girl quietly gathered her belongings and reflected on the evening. She thought about the impact her music had on the audience, the subtle shifts in energy, and the moments of inspiration she had witnessed. She felt a sense of fulfillment, knowing that she had shared a meaningful part of herself and had inspired others in ways beyond words. Stepping outside into the cool night, she took a deep breath, savoring the feeling of accomplishment. The journey had not been easy, but it had been worth it. She had turned fear into focus, doubt into courage, and mockery into wonder. The experience had strengthened her, inspired her, and reminded her of the power of music to touch hearts, create connections, and transform ordinary moments into something extraordinary. The girl took her seat quietly, watching the stage as the next performers prepared. There was a sense of excitement in the room, but also a calm energy that had settled over the audience. People were no longer quick to judge or laugh. They were listening with intent, noticing the effort, passion, and story behind each note. The girl felt a quiet satisfaction, knowing that the audience's attention had shifted, and that her earlier performance had played a part in creating this change. She thought back to the first moments she had touched the piano earlier in the show. The trembling in her hands, the nervous hesitation, and the fear of being mocked. All of it felt like a distant memory now. Instead, she remembered the way the music had flowed through her, filling the room with emotion and capturing the audience's hearts. That moment had been transformative, not just for the listeners, but for her as well. She realized that courage was not the absence of fear, but the decision to act despite it. The next performer stepped up, a young boy who looked even more nervous than she had been. She watched him for a moment, remembering how small and uncertain she had felt. As his fingers touched the keys, mistakes were evident, but the audience responded with encouragement, clapping softly and smiling in support. The girl felt a deep sense of empathy. She understood that each performer carried their own challenges, fears, and hopes. Music was not just about skill. It was about bravery, expression, and connection. As the boy played, the girl noticed the subtle ways in which the audience's energy shifted. Faces softened, eyes brightened, and a quiet appreciation grew for the effort being made. She realized that music had the power to transform the atmosphere, to turn hesitation into hope, and doubt into admiration. Her own performance had shown the audience that even the quietest, smallest individuals could make a profound impact, and now she was witnessing that same transformation in others. The girl reflected on her journey to this stage. She had spent countless hours practicing at home, often alone, perfecting melodies that spoke to her heart. There had been nights of frustration, moments of self-doubt, and times when she questioned whether anyone would ever notice her efforts. Yet, all of those experiences had prepared her for this moment. They had given her patience, resilience, and the ability to communicate through music in a way that words could not. Looking around the auditorium, she noticed the faces of the younger children who had been inspired by her earlier performance. They were still watching attentively, some mimicking hand movements on imaginary pianos, others whispering excitedly about what they had seen. The girl felt a quiet thrill, understanding that her music had sparked curiosity, imagination, and a sense of wonder. She realized that inspiration could be contagious, and that her courage had given others permission to explore their own talents. As the show continued, the girl paid close attention to each performer. Some relied on flashy techniques, others on emotional depth, but she understood that the most memorable performances were those that balanced both. She noticed the subtle expressions, the timing of pauses, and the way performers engaged with the audience. These observations were valuable lessons, helping her to refine her own approach to music and performance. She thought again about the earlier mockery she had faced. The whispers, laughter, and doubtful glances had once felt heavy and discouraging, but now they seemed like distant echoes. She understood that people often judged what they did not understand, and that authenticity had the power to shift perceptions. By trusting herself and her music, she had turned skepticism into admiration, and that realization filled her with quiet pride. During a short break, the girl spoke briefly with the teacher who had been observing her. The teacher offered words of encouragement and praise, highlighting the emotional depth and maturity in her playing. The girl listened carefully, feeling grateful for the support and guidance. She understood that mentorship and acknowledgement were important, but the most meaningful validation came from knowing she had expressed herself honestly and touched others through her music. When the performances resumed, the girl felt a renewed focus. She watched intently, analyzing how each performer approached the piano and the audience. Some performers were overly focused on technique, neglecting the emotional connection, while others relied solely on feeling, missing the precision that made the music shine. She realized that true mastery came from balancing skill with emotion, and that the most memorable performances created a shared experience between the performer and the audience. The girl also noticed the subtle ways in which her own earlier performance had influenced the room. People were listening more attentively, responding with empathy, and engaging with the performers on a deeper level. She felt a sense of quiet accomplishment, understanding that her music had set a tone of respect and appreciation, encouraging others to approach the stage with courage and sincerity. As the show continued, she reflected on the lessons she had learned from watching others. Confidence, preparation, and authenticity were key, but the willingness to be vulnerable and express one's emotions was equally important. She understood that each performer's journey was unique, and that growth came from practice, perseverance, and the courage to share one's passion openly. The girl felt a deep connection to the audience and the performers. She realized that music was not just about entertainment. It was about creating moments of understanding, empathy, and shared human experience. Each note carried emotion, each chord told a story, and each performance offered a glimpse into the heart of the musician. She understood that this was the true power of music, and that she had experienced it firsthand. As the final performers took the stage, the girl sat quietly, absorbing the energy and learning from every movement, every note, and every expression. She understood that every performer had their own story, and that courage, passion, and authenticity were what made their performances memorable. She felt inspired, knowing that she too could continue to grow, refine her skills, and connect with audiences in meaningful ways. When the show ended, the audience erupted into applause. The girl joined in, feeling a deep sense of satisfaction and completion. She had not only performed but had also observed, learned, and reflected on the journey of each performer. The evening had been a series of lessons, challenges, and moments of wonder, and she felt grateful to have been a part of it. As the auditorium emptied, the girl gathered her belongings and took a moment to reflect. She thought about the impact of her own music, the transformations she had witnessed, and the lessons she had learned from others. She understood that true artistry was about courage, expression, and connection, and that she had experienced all of these in a single evening. Stepping outside into the cool night air, the girl felt a sense of renewal. She took a deep breath, feeling the accomplishment of the evening settle in her chest. The journey had been filled with challenges, moments of doubt, and unexpected triumphs. She had turned fear into focus, skepticism into admiration, and vulnerability into strength. The experience had strengthened her, inspired her, and reminded her of the transformative power of music. As she walked home, the girl reflected on the lessons she would carry forward. She knew that there would be more stages, more audiences, and more challenges ahead. But she also knew that by trusting herself, embracing her emotions, and sharing her passion, she could continue to touch hearts and create moments of wonder. And in that knowledge, she felt a quiet confidence, a sense of purpose, and a readiness to face whatever came next with courage and grace. The final part of the talent show had arrived, and the girl felt a mix of excitement and calm as she watched the remaining performers take the stage. She had spent the evening observing, learning, and reflecting on the power of music to touch hearts. Each performance had been unique, showing different styles, levels of skill, and ways of connecting with the audience. The girl realized that the true essence of performance was not just technical skill, but the ability to convey emotion, tell a story, and create a connection that lingered long after the notes faded. She remembered her own earlier performance, how her fingers had trembled when she first sat at the piano, and how the music had eventually flowed naturally, capturing the attention and admiration of the audience. That moment had been transformative, not only for the listeners but for herself. She had discovered that courage was not the absence of fear, but the decision to act despite it. She had faced doubt, mockery, and uncertainty, and had turned them into something beautiful. As she watched the next performer, she noticed how the audience responded differently depending on the performer's presence and emotional expression. Some relied on flashy techniques and fast-paced playing, drawing immediate applause, but lacking depth. Others played more gently, conveying emotion but missing technical precision. The girl understood that the most memorable performances were those that balanced both, combining skill and heartfelt expression to create a lasting impression. During a brief break between acts, she reflected on her journey as a musician. She thought about the countless hours of practice at home, the moments of frustration and self-doubt, and the small victories that had kept her motivated. She remembered the nights when she had cried softly while playing, letting the piano express feelings she could not put into words. And she remembered the nights of joy, when melodies flowed effortlessly, filling her room with light and warmth. All of these moments had shaped her into the musician she was today, someone capable of conveying emotion and touching hearts. The audience was still buzzing from her earlier performance, and she could see the subtle shifts in energy around the room. Faces that had once been skeptical were now attentive, appreciative, and engaged. Even some of the older kids who had laughed at her at the beginning of the show were now watching with respect. The girl felt a quiet sense of pride, not from proving anyone wrong, but from knowing that her authenticity had made a difference, inspiring others to listen with open hearts. As the final performers played, the girl took mental notes of the lessons she had learned. She noticed how body language, facial expressions, and timing contributed to the overall impact of a performance. She observed how performers interacted with the audience, how pauses and dynamics affected emotional engagement, and how sincerity could turn an ordinary performance into an extraordinary one. These observations would guide her in future performances, helping her grow as a musician and a storyteller. She reflected again on the mockery she had faced earlier in the evening. The whispers, laughter, and doubtful looks had once felt heavy and discouraging, but now they seemed like distant memories. She understood that judgment often came from misunderstanding, and that authenticity had the power to change perceptions. By trusting herself and letting her emotions guide her music, she had transformed skepticism into admiration and doubt into wonder. As the show reached its conclusion, she noticed the reactions of the younger children who had been inspired by her earlier performance. They were still captivated, whispering to each other and mimicking hand movements on imaginary pianos. She realized that her courage and sincerity had not only moved adults, but had also sparked curiosity, imagination, and aspiration in the younger audience. This realization filled her with a deep sense of fulfillment. The final performance approached, and the girl watched intently. The performer was nervous but determined, stepping onto the stage with quiet confidence. The audience leaned forward, waiting for the first notes. She felt empathy and excitement, knowing exactly what it felt like to be in that position. As the music began, she observed how the performer's focus, emotion, and presence affected the room. The audience responded with respect and attention, showing that courage and sincerity mattered just as much as skill. After the final notes faded, the audience erupted into applause, cheering for every performer who had shared their talent. The girl joined in, clapping enthusiastically, feeling a deep sense of satisfaction and connection. The evening had been a journey filled with nervousness, triumph, observation, and inspiration. She had performed, learned, and grown, experiencing the true power of music to create shared moments of wonder. As the auditorium emptied, the girl took a moment to gather her thoughts. She reflected on the lessons she had learned from watching others and from her own performance. She understood that music was a language of emotion, a way to communicate stories and feelings that words could not capture. She realized that true artistry was not just about technical skill, but about courage, authenticity, and the ability to touch hearts. She thought about the impact her performance had had on the audience. Faces had changed from doubt to admiration, whispers had turned into attentive listening, and young children had been inspired to explore their own creativity. She felt a quiet joy, understanding that sharing her passion could influence and inspire others in meaningful ways. This was the essence of music, the ability to connect, to inspire, and to leave a lasting impression. Walking outside into the cool evening air, the girl felt a sense of accomplishment and renewal. She took a deep breath, savoring the quiet satisfaction that came from expressing herself fully and authentically. The journey of the talent show had been filled with challenges, moments of doubt, and unexpected triumphs. She had turned fear into focus, mockery into wonder, and vulnerability into strength. As she made her way home, she reflected on the journey ahead. She knew that there would be more stages, more audiences, and more challenges to face. But she also knew that by trusting herself, embracing her emotions, and sharing her passion, she could continue to touch hearts and create moments of wonder. Each performance would be another opportunity to grow, inspire, and connect. The girl felt a quiet confidence as she walked, understanding that her music had power, not just in the notes she played, but in the courage she brought to the piano. She had learned that every performer had a story, every audience had a heart, and every moment was a chance to create something meaningful. She felt ready for the future, eager to explore new melodies, express deeper emotions, and continue her journey as a musician who could inspire, move, and create wonder wherever she went. Finally, she stopped for a moment under a streetlight, looking up at the night sky. The stars twinkled above, and she felt a sense of infinite possibilities. The experience of the talent show had shown her that courage, passion, and authenticity could transform ordinary moments into extraordinary ones. She smiled softly, feeling grateful for the journey she had taken and excited for the adventures that lay ahead. And with that, she walked forward into the night, carrying music, wonder, and confidence in her heart, ready to face whatever the future held.